TelecomTV, where ICT connects.
Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. My name is Martin Warwick and we are at the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress 2013 in Bad Homburg, which is a spa town in Germany. And I'm talking with Eric Hanselman, who is the Chief Analyst with 451 Research. Eric, you're very welcome. Let's begin at the beginning. It is said that SDN is the agent of transformation for the network. Do you believe that?
I do, although the degree of that transformation and I think a lot of organizations' readiness for it really varies quite a bit. SDN's potential is huge. If we look at what the transformative capabilities are in bringing the level of programmability, orchestration capabilities that we've had in compute and storage for some time, to networks where we haven't had the same level of development of programmability. The kinds of capabilities and the ways in which we can deliver new business services around that sort of flexibility and that adaptability has the potential to be large. The question, of course, is how ready are organizations to be able to take those capabilities and put them to good use?
Indeed, because it may be transformational, but it's not an easy transformation, is it?
It is, no, not by a long shot, unfortunately. Many organizations have moved down the road. If you look at enterprise, and one of the things that's really visible here at the Congress is the difference that's coming out in terms of how enterprises and network operators and carriers are really starting to look at the capabilities the SDN offers. Enterprises have been moving towards automation and orchestration, but carriers have had to have a greater level of maturity there for a while. And so they're a bit more ready to be able to make those shifts. And that's one of the things we're seeing here at the Congress.
Okay. What do you think will be the major benefit of SDN to enterprise and network users and eventually for the end user?
Well, for enterprise networks, agility is far and away the greatest capability and the greatest potential benefit. And that agility gets driven out of a means to be able to integrate network programmability in the same kind of orchestration that they've been doing with the rest of the infrastructure. Most enterprises are just starting to get to the edges of virtualization density where they need networks to be more flexible. But that's a significant shift in being able to go build out network infrastructure in ways in which you can really distribute compute loads in whatever way the enterprise really needs. We've seen bits and pieces of that, especially in hyperscale data center environments. But in the enterprise, in the broad market, it's still fairly early days. But that agility is really that key point.
Thank you. How does the adoption of SDN impact the opportunity for users in other key areas? And I'm talking here about the cloud, of course, big data, service enablement, and so on.
Well, the cloud in particular is an area where you're starting to get compute densities that run into the limitations of traditional network deployments.
Sure.
You know, we've typically had network interconnect as the underpinnings that have been fairly stable. But what happens is you get the cloud densities, you start to run into the difficulties of network flexibility. If you can't reconfigure the network in the same way in which you can move compute loads and shift storage in a cloud environment, you start to run into bottlenecks, you start to limit efficiency, you hit bounds in which you can really run scale in cloud. Big data, again, flexibility of interconnect is one of the larger issues. And the capabilities the SDN brings gives you the ability to now distribute both storage capabilities and better leverage the way those compute environments can actually connect to them and use that storage capability that you've got.
Okay, thank you. What do you see as being the biggest barriers? We've touched on this, but I'd like to get some more detail from you, to the adoption of SDN. For example, security is always talked about, investment is talked about, and also the cultural change necessary in organizations to be able to do this. And there seems to be a lot of resistance building there.
Well, we spend a lot of time working with studies of both the market and adopters, and security is raised as the number one concern over and over again. The difficulty, though, is that I think security is often raised as a broad concern against change, simply because end users and systems administrators are looking to minimize risk. And the change as large as SDN is perceived to be is seen as very risky. And so security comes up over and over again. I think, though, the largest impediment really winds up being issues around all of the people, political, organizational aspects of how organizations operate and how they integrate networking capability. These are areas that have been siloed for so long that there have been such distinct functions that making that jump to an area in which networking gets integrated with other portions of the organizational IT infrastructure is something that organizations have to have a certain level of maturity in order to move to. So those are, I think that's the larger end of that challenge.
It's October 2013, and last year, October 2012, just about a year ago exactly to the day at the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress, which is also held here in Germany, in Darmstadt. The original white paper for NFV was presented at that. What's happened to SDN and NFV in that intervening 12-month period?
Well, it's been a fairly wild ride getting to where we are today, but I think the most overwhelming part of the change right now is that we're actually starting to see real deployments. We're starting to see a lot of what was conceptual work a year ago actually put into place. A year ago, we were just starting to get a view into what some hyperscale users were looking at, the Googles, the Facebooks, the eBays of the world. What we're seeing today are real use cases, implementations that are now starting to put in place some of those benefits. So for SDN, the flexibility that we can start to build. We've now seen cloud environments like OpenStack and what's happening with Neutron now start to move forward to places where they've got broad usability. When we look at NFV, we've got real live virtualization deployments where we're starting to see service capabilities like IMS actually start to be virtualized, integrated, and created in more flexible environments where those virtualization promises are really starting to see the light of day.
Do you think NFV will become the biggest consumer of cloud networking and SDN services? And if so, what impact will that have? I'm asking you to speculate a bit here, but I think it's an interesting and important question.
Well, it is very definitely. When you start thinking about consumption of those resources, from a carrier perspective, NFV has the potential to be able to really start generating a significant amount of service capability. That would consume an awful lot of cloudy level capabilities. The question is how fast service providers move in those areas, and they'll be treading relatively carefully. I think in the definition of NFV, we've moved fairly rapidly in the last year through what was, I think, an early enterprise-focused view, virtualizing load balancers and availability management services, those kinds of things, to a more carrier-focused view. But I think there's still a very large potential for those kind of capabilities to be consumed in enterprise settings as well.
Final question to you. Do you think NFV is capable of unifying the two models of SDN infrastructure, that is, centralized and distributed?
Well, in terms of unification, distributed models have a series of advantages in terms of how you actually build out deployment. NFV utilization models could start to leverage some of those capabilities. As far as actually unifying architectures and approaches, not directly, but I think that's one of the benefits of NFV, is that it can really be deployed and implemented in a number of different ways. Distributor unified architectures are really going to focus more on what the organization's needs and requirements are for deployment and for scale. So when you start looking at where those deployments happen to shift, I don't think unification is the broader goal. Better utilization, I think, will be more than sufficient for most organizations.
Interesting stuff. Eric Hanselman, thank you very much indeed.
TelecomTV, where ICT connects.